Time's running out. This is what she's gonna shoot her ult. It's gonna be a lion and it's gonna eat anyone that she's mad at. I feel like she would shoot a laser pointer and release a swarm of lions that would like eat whoever she was shooting the laser pointer at. Hi, my name is Thomas Ranby. I'm a senior concept artist on the League PC team. More specifically, I work on the personalization initiative, also known as the skins team. We've made some really awesome projects over the year that I'm super fortunate to have been involved in. A personal favorite, I was the sole concept artist on the Caitlyn Art and Sustainability Update, also known as the ASU. Really bringing Caitlyn into the modern standard for League of Legends and Runeterra on the whole. I was lucky enough to get to design Spirit Blossom Cassiopeia, and getting to see how so many different teams and so many different artists iterated on those designs and made something that was really holistic and really impressive. You know, like the Kin of the Stained Blade animation, the Path animation. There were so many really awesome versions of those characters that players got to interface with as that event progressed. So today we're gonna be taking a look at Caitlyn herself. I prepared a file that's essentially my concept for the updated Pool Party Caitlyn skin and sort of turned it into a template for us to try some maybe kind of zany or goofy skin ideas on. So I have this mug here from Bilgewater Brew. I'm gonna be pulling some hopefully pretty crazy skin ideas out of it and seeing if we can come up with something that's cool but not cool enough that it'll be real someday so I don't get in trouble. So let's see what we've got. It's like a fortune, okay. Postal Carrier Caitlyn, that would be cute. That would be a cute skin. 1990s Caitlyn. Put her in like a plaid, like flannel, or like something Avril Lavigne would wear. That would be kind of cool. Lion Tamer Caitlyn, wait, that would be awesome. Like a big top, like circus, cause she's got the top hat and everything. Big top Caitlyn sounds really cute. So the first part of any sort of concept procedure, at least personally, that I like to go through, and a lot of other artists at Riot, I think, prioritize as well, is research. More often than not, the very early pre-production stages are comprised of compiling reference, making sure that the design you're creating is, you know, culturally resonant, culturally sensitive. So we're looking at Lion Tamer Caitlyn, which I'm gonna kind of try to imagine in almost a more umbrella, sort of like big top, like ringleader, Circus Caitlyn, which I think we could do really well. Her rig, I think, will allow for some really fun design choices. The top hat is part of her base look. I think that's pretty iconic to you know, like circus ringmasters. So today I prepared a Photoshop file, sort of taking the final concept that I put together for the updated Pool Party Caitlyn skin in order for us to use as a mannequin to paint this new Ringmaster Lion Tamer Caitlyn idea on top of. The Pool Party skin works well for this because the costuming is a lot less bulky than some of her other skins like Arctic Warfare, so it's pretty easy for us to sort of take this and turn it into a mannequin and just ideate pretty quickly on top of. Normally in the concept process, we wouldn't be starting in-game like this, but in the interest of time, I'm just gonna jump right into in-game with this. Before I get started, I wanted to call out just some opportunity spaces that Caitlyn herself presents as a champion, as well as certain limitations that we'll have to work with. So when we were working on Caitlyn's update, one of the priorities was for us to basically take all of the extra animation work that Caitlyn has seen in her various skins over the years and compile them all into the base rig so that when we make content for her in the future, we'll have that at our disposal. So for example, the Luna Wraith Caitlyn skin has two coattails that sort of extend down like this with tassels at the end. Pool Party Caitlyn herself wears almost like a translucent sort of shawl that's structured in such a way that we could turn it into, let's say, a cape or a cloak. There are control joints at her hips for the pouches that she wears in base that we've turned into things like a holstered pistol in her sheriff skin, a whip in her safari skin. So there's a lot of opportunity for us to really take this base silhouette of Caitlyn and augment it with costuming elements that feel really ingrained in the thematic and very exciting. On that note though, we should take into consideration certain limitations. So let's say we wanted to make a Caitlyn skin where she had long hanging sleeves. No joints currently exist on Caitlyn's rig for that, so we would need to invest a lot of extra time in animation, and that might be outside of the scope for the particular project we're working on. So we would want to avoid those too. Looking at Caitlyn's gun, it is broken down in a really specific way to make sure that it functions correctly in all of her animations. The gun itself is comprised of a large body piece an initial barrel piece, and then a smaller inner barrel piece, and these all move independently of one another. So we need to make sure that we're designing them so that they can slide in and out of one another without any sort of issue whatsoever. The last thing to note is that this rear piece, the stock, I believe it's called, of her rifle, is also a unique piece, and it animates. When she sort of shoots her gun, it shrinks and it extends into the gun itself, so that way it doesn't clip through her arms when she's going through the animations. So that's basically everything that we have to worry about. So I'm gonna get started. I've already painted out quite a bit of the existing costume on the Pool Party Caitlyn skin so that we don't have to worry about that right now. I'm gonna go in and I'm gonna just start getting rid of this really wide-brimmed sun hat because we do want to make sure that whatever sort of hat we put her in, it's gonna feel thematically appropriate. In her base, she's got her purple top hat, which we either could or could not use depending on the context of the skin. It's something that I think we've tried to make a little less goofy in more modern interpretations of her, but it is something that is still really kind of core to her character, and we have played around with replacing it or removing it entirely in certain skins. So if you look at Officer Caitlyn, Arctic Warfare Caitlyn, Safari Caitlyn, we've replaced those hats with something, but then she has other skins such as Lunar Wraith Caitlyn, where rather than a hat, we've given her some verticality to her headgear and her hairstyle to sort of fill that element of her silhouette up. Ringmasters luckily, are often seen wearing top hats, which I think matches perfectly well with Caitlyn's base fantasy. So we're gonna be taking a look at that. Caitlyn also does have one hanging joint chain here at the side of her temple for a strand of hair. So that will animate as well, so we do have some opportunity space for that. So let's just get rid of the hat for now, actually, and I'm gonna make a new layer. I'm just gonna name it Costuming, and I'm gonna start out with just that really iconic red blazer or tuxedo jacket that more often than not you'll see a ringmaster wearing. And what I think is gonna work perfectly about this design for Caitlyn in this universe is that she does have those two long hanging coattail chains from the Lunar Wraith skin that we can really effectively turn into the kind of coattails that you would see on a tuxedo that a performer in this sort of universe would likely be wearing. So when I'm designing skins for League, even when I'm doing my thumbnail sketches, I typically don't work quite a lot with line. League has some really, really specific visual hierarchy rules that we like to abide by, and it can be really easy for us to get sort of bogged down in finer detail when what we really need to be worrying about when we're looking at these characters in the top-down isometric view are really bold shapes, making sure that the values of everything stand out well. So we want her upper body to be higher in value or brighter than her lower body to make sure that it stands out and is visible against Summoner's Rift. And the same is very true of her gun. We always want the character's source of power to be prioritized in the read and make sure that it's super visible against the rest of her costuming. So I'm just gonna start just kind of like laying out sort of the framework of this costume. Give her one of those classic sort of lapels. And oftentimes when I'm working on something like this, I'll really be thinking more in layers in Photoshop, almost like layers of clothing on the body. So just making new layers for each individual sort of garment. And I want her to feel really like overstated, really theatrical, really almost like ceremonial in a sense that some of these performers that you see. I feel like that aesthetic is super, super iconic. So let's see if we can put something together that feels at home for Caitlyn on this universe. I think it's important to make sure that designs feel true to the inherent core of the character that really is the kernel of themselves that players sort of know and love. So I wanna make sure that we're avoiding a design that feels like overly tropey or something that feels like unnecessarily sexualized. You know, I wanna make sure that we're really like paying homage to Caitlyn in the way that players enjoy seeing her. It's easy when you work this way to just kind of like zoom out, take a look at things at a glance, and see how everything is going to read at scale. And personally, when I'm working on a skin design, I think a lot of times if you really get bogged down in rendering and finer detail, it starts to muddy things. We wanna make sure that we're avoiding a lot of visual noise when it comes to skins in League, because so much is going on the screen at once. You have the characters themselves, you have the abilities that they're flinging at one another, trying to kill each other. We wanna make sure that gameplay is prioritized, so the very thing first and foremost that we should be worried about is, does this look like Caitlyn? Does this inform the thematic? And then our player is going to be able to really engage with this content in a way that's fun and comfortable and doesn't introduce just a lot of like visual noise and extra thinking to the experience. So this epaulet that I've sort of designed on the shoulder of her jacket right now, it's pretty soft. It doesn't stick out too far from her body, and as such, doesn't really feel like the strongest choice when we're looking at the design on the whole. But if I were to extend it and sharpen it and just sort of increase the real estate that it takes up comparable to her body, it's much more visible. And when you're looking at this skin at a glance, you're really going to be able to see it and sort of pick it out. I think I might make her blonde. We haven't made Caitlyn blonde yet, and that might be sort of a fun opportunity for her in this universe. I think hairstyle is a really fun way to sort of experiment with character, finding different ways for characters to express themselves. My personal opinion when it comes to character design is that each choice should really feel representative of who a character is. I think it's easy for designs to start to feel, you know, not quite true to the characters, what the investment that players have in them when you're making design choices that feel sort of out of place. So I want to kind of think about Caitlyn as a character and how, were she to take a job as a lion tamer or a ringmaster at a circus, how she would dress herself and how she would kind of style herself in that manner. I'm wondering if I could add some cool like hip props. I guess a lion tamer would probably use a whip or something. And again, Caitlyn is like a pretty dangerous character. You know, she's not the kind of character that you'd want to cross. So I think sharp shapes, I think, work really well on her. You look at base Caitlyn, her updated design is a lot of really bold, really austere, really severe cuts, a lot of like sharp geometry. So things that are a little bit softer, a little bit rounder, I think don't work quite as well for her, depending on the thematic. Even like her pool party skin, it's a lot of really bold geometric shapes kind of making up the shapes in her suit. The hat really juts out. I think you want to make her feel not necessarily aggressive, but dangerous if crossed. So I'm gonna make a new layer behind her body just to sort of block in these tuxedo coattails that we do have the bones for, so we can use without worry of making an animator or a tech artist mad at us. As a concept artist, you're really trying to solve problems for your team at the same time as you're trying to generate excitement about the product that everyone is working on. Concept really sort of solidifies the beginning of the creative production pipeline. So my job is to almost lay out the framework for what the team envisions the final product to be, and then to support each of those disciplines as we move through the pipeline and make sure that everything is turning out according to the team's vision. So we do sort of lay the framework at the beginning of the pipeline, but then remain present throughout production to make sure that as requirements arise, every discipline in production has what they need to fully realize the final product. So for certain thematics, everyone might get really excited about specific choices. So like if I wanted to, you know, let's say make an extra joint chain where she did have like a fully realized whip hanging at the side of her body. That might feel cool and it might be exciting, but is it going to inform the thematic enough for us to invest the time in adding that to the skin? Maybe I could like quilt the lapel in a way. That might feel kind of cool. Like a quilted leather sort of there. Yeah. Honestly, this is like half the time I'm just like working on something that I've like already done a thumbnail for, and then you just try stuff out in like once you get something in game, because that's when I think you're really gonna get the best idea of what the potentials for the design are. It can be really easy to get super excited about like a front-facing sort of beauty shot that you've designed to get the team excited about the direction you're choosing, but you're only really gonna know how things work once you get it on Summoner's Rift. I wonder if we could make like a cool asymmetrical kind of cut. That might be kind of nice. Maybe some like diamond-shaped buttons. I feel like diamonds always really work as sort of visual shorthand for circuses and clowns. Any kind of like playing card imagery I think might feel cool. We've never made Caitlyn blonde. I think it might be kind of fun. Do like a curled like ring style. Something that just feels really kind of vintage, really kind of performative. Something that like a kid in a circus would get excited by, I guess. I don't know. I think it's cool to sort of subvert and explore character personality in different universes. I think like Star Guardian Zoe is a really good example of that. Zoe is pretty happy and bubbly in her base, and then Star Guardian kind of twists that into something a little more sinister. I think it worked really well for Star Guardian Zoe because her voice lines are really just happy-go-lucky and fun-loving, and then you apply a pretty twisted voice filter to it, and they quickly become kind of frightening. But for Caitlyn, I think you want her to feel dangerous. You want her to feel you wouldn't want to mess with her, but in a universe like Lion Tamer, Circus, Ringleader, she shouldn't feel like evil or scary or anything. Okay, coming together. Let's make a new layer. Actually, let's finish out this sleeve first. I wonder if I can give her some kind of like cool accessory on this arm. Just something to like shake up a little bit of this symmetry that's going on in the design. I used to work pretty heavily on the emote content for the game, and that was always funny because I had no control over my face when I was working on the emotes because they're just so like stylized and you want them to be as expressive as possible so that when players use them for the 2 seconds that they're visible in game, they'll be able to tell what the intent of the emote is and they'll be able to communicate and express in a functional manner. But so people would walk by my desk when I was painting emotes and I would just be making really ugly faces, just trying to like match myself to the expression that I was drawing. So that doesn't happen as often when I'm working on concept, thankfully. So I'm looking at a lot of the reference that I'm seeing. There's some pretty nice like gold filigree, and I think that does get more exciting than just this typical standard like flat golden line sort of outlining the lapel. So I'm gonna see later on if I can come up with a design that feels just a little bit more exciting, adds a little bit more visual interest without, again, creating too much noise. I've heard the art style referred to before as almost like a living painting, and I think that's a really good way to sort of think about things in the way that you're structuring your colors and your values. So I feel like I wanna do something that feels kind of vintage in the lower body. I feel like just like a plain black, like, tuxedo pant wouldn't be the coolest, so I feel like maybe some kind of cool like vintage, something you'd see on like the boardwalk in like the 30s, like a striped kind of pants or something. Let's see what I can come up with. And yeah, again, Caitlyn does have a good amount of extra labor sort of invested into her animation kit now. So as we sort of progress, I do want to start thinking about just ways that I can take advantage of that and make something that feels fun and exciting for players. So I'll start thinking about the hair in a little bit. I just want to get a little bit more laid out as far as the costuming is concerned. I honestly kind of wonder if like a cummerbund might feel better than this vest, but then I don't want so much negative space here at the beginning of her pants. And again, normally I would have a design pretty planned out before we got to this stage, so I'm kind of making things up as I go along, but I think she's looking pretty good. The way the character looks is one thing, but the way you sort of visualize their abilities and their skill set is another entirely. And I think more often than not, that's what makes a skin really exciting and successful, is the way you sort of recontextualize a player's or a character's power fantasy into the universe. So with Caitlyn, if she was a lion tamer, trying to like recontextualize shooting someone with a bullet into that sort of like fun, whimsical fantasy, I think that's where the challenge lies. Like, does she aim her gun with like a laser and then a bunch of lions come out and chase the laser down and like hit the person that she's aiming at? Just trying to come up with fun and exciting ways to envision our characters in these universes. I'll give her like a fun, like Victorian high society boot. Oh, maybe I'll put her in like, what are those called? Like spats, those little things that fancy people used to wear on their shoes. So you can see like even just in this really like rough block-in, a lot of higher value elements, the gold of the pauldrons, the lapel, her face, sitting at the upper body, the pants, the boots, they're much darker, they're shaded down is what we kind of refer to it as, to make sure that the upper body is what's sticking out against the background of Summoner's Rift, and it's not drawing too much, or the lower body is not drawing too much attention. That's very, very important when you're working on skin designs. I think the costuming is getting sort of exciting and performative enough that you could make the gun itself feel almost like ceremonial. I don't think it necessarily needs to feel like the tool that she tames lions with. You know, there's a lot of florid shape language that's starting to take root in the lapel. You could really like play up that Harlequin pattern. There's a lot of ways that we're gonna be able to make the gun feel pretty cool. I usually start when I'm working on a concept, layering everything out pretty strictly, and then I just merge everything and just paint. I think it's easy to make sense of everything when it's all sort of existing in the same place. Everybody's process is different. I know plenty of artists on the Skins team who I envy very much, who are masters of using line in their work. I'm just impatient, I guess, is what it boils down to. But I really like to make sure that form and value are sort of paramount to the design, and it's easier for me to sort of hit that in the details if I haven't really delineated everything super clearly. So yeah, again, trying to play up like almost like a quilted sort of leather material with as little visual information as possible, just to make sure that it's not muddying the design. Oh man, her Yordle snap trap would be so cute because she could use it to like, it's a little like lion food or something. I really feel like you could make anything work. You know, like no skin is a bad skin. You just gotta think about it long enough. This lapel is gonna extend behind her neck. This design needs to be creatable in a 3D space by a character artist. So you wanna make sure that you're thinking about form and how everything is going to interact. Designing for, let's say you're making a character for like a comic book, something that's 2D in nature, those designs don't necessarily need to work quite the same as a 3D video game character design would. So it's just important to keep that in mind so you're not creating, you know, just extra questions for a character artist to solve. So when I'm working on a design like this, because this isn't really for illustration purposes, I don't get too bogged down in like detail in the same way that like a splash artist would. So like this, this design on the lapel here, a splash artist could take this and really, really fantasize it, make some really intricate filigree shapes. Because when you're looking at Caitlin, it's typically gonna be about this large. You wanna make sure that it's not super, super, super busy. So again, yeah, just like prioritizing like form and function and value and readability, and still creating something that feels exciting and feels successful for the thematic that you're trying to design in. The cuff of her jacket, probably. Maybe like a diamond-shaped sort of cufflink or something. I don't remember how cufflink works. God, it's been such a long time since I've dressed up for anything. Just been sitting in my apartment for 2 years. So once I get just a little bit more blocked into the design in a hat and hairstyle design for her, I'm gonna move on to the gun. Because again, that is like Caitlin's bread and butter. It's the most important thing that you should be able to see when you see her running at you in lane. But I also think it's better to start designing the costuming first because so much of that is going to inform the decisions that you're making when you're designing a weapon. I think it's easier to design a weapon a character is holding than it is to design the character that is holding a weapon. Okay, so I'm just gonna select this pant leg here. I'm just gonna start painting in just a little bit more information as far as the value is concerned. Because I really want it to be kind of clean. And again, shading down so that it's not drawing too much attention from the upper body. So Caitlin out of our champion roster is, I would say, one of the more grounded and mechanically less complex champions, but she's found a lot of resonance with players. And one of the goals of the ASU was really taking that kernel of what players loved about her and bringing it to the forefront and then trimming away what felt dated or aged. The design was largely informed by the season start cinematic from a few years ago, in which Jason Chan did an amazing iteration of Caitlin and a bunch of other characters like Vi, Lux, Silas was in that one, a bunch of them. The design for Caitlin's ASU was largely informed by Caitlin in that cinematic. Because I think for a few years now, there's been like Caitlin as players imagine her, and there's been Caitlin as she has existed in game. And Caitlin like almost felt like a parody of herself, and the team thought that with the release of Arcane, we wanted to create a more cohesive experience for players who are going to be introduced to the universe through the show. So you would watch Arcane and then you wouldn't come to League and see, you know, Caitlin in her mini skirt and her big goofy top hat. We wanted to make her feel really like accomplished and really capable and really representative of the Caitlin that you meet in Arcane maybe a few years down the road. So that was like a really big part of our goal when it came to the ASU. I think she's stated canonically to be 6 feet tall in Arcane. So she's a little bit taller than a lot of our other female champs. She's very willowy, and I think that is another thing that we try to really preserve in the ASU, and it's something that we try to get across in her skins as well. We didn't have a lot of knowledge about Caitlin or the role that she was gonna play in Arcane, But I think, again, like that Caitlyn was so largely informed by, you know, the stories that we've been telling about her on the universe page. There's been a lot of short stories that she's featured in. It really was just about kind of getting her up to date and bringing her into the future and satisfying the vision that players already had of Caitlyn inside of their heads. So that was really cool. That was an awesome opportunity to get to be a part of. And I've been, oh my gosh, I've been a Caitlyn main since season 3. So to have had the chance to like work on something that I was gonna see so often was really, really, really exciting. There's no real rhyme or reason to the way that skins are assigned. There is to the way that they're chosen. We have a lot of data that sort of backs up the decisions that we make when it comes to what champions are slotted into what thematics. But the artists who work on them, you just get what you're assigned to. So this one was like really like up my alley. I was really interested in being part of this project. Oh, it was a total blast. And the team that worked on the Caitlyn ASU was like incredible. It was such a collaborative experience. I learned a lot from so many different artists. I was really, really fortunate to get to be involved in that. Yeah, I'll add like some kind of belt with some cool decorative thing, and then she will have that whip, because I feel like that's pretty iconic to the sort of role that we're imagining for her in this universe. So far, I'm not thrilled with what I've done with the boots. Want to hit that, want to hit the hairstyle, a couple more props, and then we'll see where we are and we'll move on to the gun. I'm gonna be playing up a lot of this like golden filigree, maybe like a black and white like diamond shape or red and black diamond shape in the barrel of the gun. We'll see where we land with it. So Caitlyn has like a pretty large catalog of skins, some of which I'd worked on before the update. I got to work on Arcade Caitlyn. That was actually one of the first skins that I made when I moved over to the skins team, and that was awesome. Because I love that thematic, I love the champion. It was really cool to get to be involved in that. And yeah, it was like even cooler to get to take that design that I worked on and then sort of give it a fresh coat of paint, you know? Like apply a new set of animations to it. I got to design all like the recall props. She uses like a health potion instead of a teacup in that one now, which I think is pretty cute. And it was cool. The team got together and we really like brainstormed a bunch of ideas for just ways Caitlyn could sort of express herself and we could get her character across in the update. So that was a lot of fun. So I mentioned before that a lot of the decisions that we make as far as the thematic space in League of Legends and what thematics go into the game are driven by data, which is very true, but we also do have an opportunity to sort of use our voices and raise ideas and pitches that we think would make for, you know, resonant or effective content in the game. And this applies to anyone at the company. So there's plenty of skin thematics that exist in League that have actually been pitched by rioters from all over the company. Every single department, you know, everyone is open to it. So myself, I've actually pitched a few thematics. One of the ones that recently came out that was greenlit and went into production was the Cafe Cuties line. It was sort of the combination of a couple of our other thematics, kind of take some of our more like food-inspired thematics, taking the French-made Nidalee aesthetic, but making it a little bit more cute, just taking a little bit of the more mature vibe out of it. And that one was super fun to work on. We got to really explore a pretty unique, pretty magical space that I think players are really enjoying exploring and messing around in. All right, so I'm working on Caitlyn's hair now. Again, I mentioned she does have one joint chain. I kind of like her as a blonde. She does have one joint chain that sort of runs down the side of her temple. I'm gonna try to give it like a pretty wavy, pretty glamorous, sort of curled look. Again, just not really getting too invested in detail and just trying to figure out how everything is going to lay and like the general value and structure of everything. It's like one large sort of strand that swoops around to the side and then some wavy elements. And we can still have some hair that comes here over her shoulder. It's just not gonna animate like the hair on the other side of her face. It's gonna be static. So we don't want it to extend too much into the costuming so that it doesn't deform when Caitlyn herself animates. And if I were to be taking this to final, I'd be really invested in like making sure that like everything was kind of clearly delineated by value structure, but we don't have a ton of time. So I'm really just gonna kind of get the barest bones, and then maybe I'll just do like a thick outline here just so that's a little bit more apparent. And usually when I'm working on costuming, the boots or like the lower body is gonna be a much darker material. Even if you look at some of our skins like Star Guardian, The characters are wearing a lot of white, but if you look at the difference between the white on their upper body and the white on their lower body, it's almost more like a really muted dark lilac blue on the lower body and then a true white up top. So the value structure is something you always want to be considering. And we'll add in just the very rough beginning of, this is a whip. Let's just call that a whip. Okay. Let's start thinking about this hat. I don't want it to be as overstated as her base top hat. I feel like something that's more like a fascinator might be kind of cute. Something that feels a little bit more tongue-in-cheek, a little fun. That takes itself a little less seriously. I mean, if you look at Caitlyn before the update, like the proportions of the hat were like a little on the silly side, which I think was the original intent, but as Caitlyn herself became a more serious character, we kind of shied away from those interpretations, but I think we could bring a little bit of it back here. You know, maybe not quite so Mad Hattery, making sure that the elements are making sense in a 3D space. We don't want it to feel like a 2D image slapped on top. We want it to actually feel like it's sitting on her head. So this brim would be extending a little further back. Yeah, there we go. Honestly, this like internal monologue is like, external internal monologue is like helping. Honestly, normally when we're working on something like this, if we were like making a new thematic universe, we have a really strong team called Thematic Development. And they do a lot to build sort of visual libraries for things like shape language, iconography. If we were making this skin for real, Thematic Development probably would have already like named the circus. It would have had a logo. I could have put that like on her merch. She could have had like a Caitlyn Circus logo on her hat. But for right now, we don't have anything too crazy. So we'll just keep it kind of simple. Most people are gonna be playing it on Summoner's Rift, so you can work kind of like a green bounce light into some of the shadows on the costuming, and it'll look pretty convincing when you have it running around in game. All right, let's add like some just little closures here to the jacket. So we're getting close to like what for today's purposes I'll call design lock on Caitlyn herself. Normally this process would take like weeks. So bear with me while we get something figured out. We're gonna start moving on to the gun. I'm trying to think of a way to incorporate the Lion Tamer fantasy into this skin without having a lion featured outright, because it's just not something that's part of Caitlyn's skin. And we also don't wanna make it seem, I try to shy away from, even in like the Safari skin in the update, any kind of like actual like thing that could be construed as like abuse of an animal. I wanna make sure we're avoiding that. So I'm going to feature the lion motif, I think, pretty heavily in the gun. I think it would be pretty cool for the gun barrel to actually extend physically out of the mouth of like a sculptural lion head. So I'm gonna try that out, see how far I can push it, and just keep the gun and the costuming feeling really like outlandish and kind of like fun and performative, like she'd actually be at a circus. And in choosing my colors, I'm like picking a lot from the colors that I've already placed down. I wanna make sure each of these materials feel uniform with one another, and also like they're being kind of affected by one another. If I were to take this to full polish, there'd be a lot of red bouncing into the golds and vice versa. You really want everything to feel kind of at home in the same space. I'm gonna bring this down so the sort of clip that attaches it would cover the entire thing. Because again, you wanna make sure that things you can stretch, like, you can bend your imagination, you can like, suspend your disbelief to an extent, but wherever possible, I like to make it so that things feel functional, especially because like, if a cosplayer were ever to make something, I wanna make sure that they don't have to like break the laws of physics to make a costume work. I try to keep that in mind when I'm working on stuff for some of our more cosplayable champions. But I've even seen people cosplay Urgot, so I guess everybody can be anybody. All right, so she's looking pretty good. Let's move on to the gun. So when you see Caitlyn running around in game, it's pretty easy for us as concept artists working on cosmetic content to retain her champion identity, because she's one of the only champions with a weapon as almost comically overstated as it is in game. So Caitlyn has a massive sniper rifle, and that's what we would consider her primary read. So when you're designing content for Caitlyn, you wanna make sure that that sniper rifle is first and foremost like the most visible part of the design. If we were to reduce its size, reduce its thickness, make it less visible, it would be more difficult for a player who's playing against Caitlyn or playing with a Caitlyn on their team to realize that that's who they were seeing in game, and they might mistake her for someone else. You wanna make sure when you're working on a skin for Caitlyn, particularly when the gun is involved, that certain elements are just kind of lining up with one another. In Caitlyn's case, We really want to make sure that the points of contact on the gun are remaining consistent throughout. So that means the area where she's actually holding on to the grip of the gun, the end of the stock of the gun where it's going to sit into her shoulder, and the beginning and end of each of the individual barrel pieces is really going to have a big effect on the way that the gun animates. We want to make sure that she's always got a place to keep her hand on the underside of the barrel, always holding it in the same position, just really making sure that we're taking those things into consideration. She's got 3 detached sort of lenses that also sit at the top of the gun. We've kind of done away with them in some of her skins. It's not always the most necessary, but I do think it's a cool element. The way that weapons are sort of structured and laid out obviously varies a lot from champion to champion. In Caitlyn's case, again, we had a really high fidelity, fully realized version of her gun present in the Warriors cinematic. And that was something that we really wanted to carry over. Because Caitlyn's gun in that, it's incredibly mechanically complex. And I think that serves to sort of illustrate Caitlyn's innate sort of capability in a way that I think is really cool. If the gun were simpler, I think it would sort of feel like anybody could pick it up and use it. But because the gun is so complex and almost magical in nature in the way that it harnesses energy, it really feels like something that is sort of unique to Caitlyn herself. Like not anyone in Piltover could like find it on the street, pick it up, and then just start blasting goons with it, you know? And you can like omit certain pieces and the animation of certain pieces as you want, but it does sort of lead to a loss in quality after an extent. Like if we were to take base Caitlyn and remove all of the extra sources of animation that she has, she like, after she ults someone, if she remains idle, she'll tip her hat. Her hair has a lot of motion in it. Depending on the skin, she's got the coattails and everything. If we were to completely remove the hat animations, remove the hair animation, the skin itself might feel a little less valuable than some of her others. So we want to make sure that we're retaining as much of that player value as possible. We really wanted it to feel sophisticated and precise and elegant like Caitlyn herself. So I think no matter the concept, you really want to make sure that you're prioritizing gameplay above all things. You know, none of our cosmetic content should ever really come at the expense of gameplay. And that includes character identity and affinity and making sure that each character reads as the type of character they function as in games. So if I were to design a skin for, let's say, Evelyn, versus designing a skin for the current live version of Udyr. Those 2 champions pose very different sort of requirements and very different obstacles that you have to sort of work around to make a final product that's really satisfying for players. So in Caitlyn's case, she's a ranged marksman, better known as an ADC among the player base. And her cosmetic content should reflect that. You know, she should feel fragile, but she should feel dangerous at the same time. She's capable of dealing quite a lot of damage, but if you get close to her and close that gap between her and yourself, you're likely going to be able to take her out. So the designs should really feel informed by that fact. If you look at like Caitlyn's weaponry, Caitlyn's designs, they should feel a lot sharper and more dangerous than, say, a champion like Soraka, whose primary purpose is to mitigate damage and heal the members of her team. And those like active gameplay decisions are gonna be informed by the designs that you're making. So just making sure you're considering that, which isn't to say that Soraka can't have like an edgier or more like dangerous looking skin. It just shouldn't make her feel different than the way she functions in game. So like if we were to make like a Caitlyn skin where she was completely like decked out in like medieval armor and it really bulked her silhouette up. It made her feel really bulky and really tanky. We wouldn't want to do that because we would really want to make sure that her status as an ADC is reinforced by the designs that we're making. So I actually got my start, I guess you could say like in the League community. It was back like when I was in college and shortly after graduating, I got really into it with a bunch of friends. I was super taken by the characters and the narrative, and Caitlyn's in particular. I really, really enjoyed playing as her. I loved what we were doing with her in, you know, supplementary content like short stories, things like that. As a fan artist, I felt that her design felt pretty dated. So I actually started doing fan concepts. I would post them pretty frequently to the boards. I really, really was excited by the potential that she had in the universe, and I was excited for her to sort of live up to what Piltover evolved to be, which is why I was so excited about the potential of the ASU and of Arcane and to really visualize Caitlyn in a new light. I've been with Riot for almost 5 years. It's been like just under 4.5, I think, if I'm remembering correctly. But yeah, I mean, I've wanted to work on this project for such a long time. So to have gotten the chance to contribute to it really was a dream come true. And I'm super grateful to have had that chance. It was such a blast. The team was incredibly talented. Obviously, every artist that works on the game has their own signature, sort of unique touch. But I think over the years, League has really defined what its visual style is, even more so with like the onset of Arcane and like the Tales of Runeterra shorts. I think there's a lot of work that's gone into fleshing out like a really unique visual space for League and its characters to exist in. So I was actively posting quite a few concepts to the subreddits, to the boards. Eventually, an art outsource manager named Larry, who's amazing, he reached out to me on Twitter and asked if there was a portfolio that I could send for him to relay to his supervisors. So I did that. I was over the moon just to have been contacted. Larry sent my stuff up the chain, and eventually I got taken on to the. I started a contract position working with the Champion Update team. So the first couple projects I worked on were much like the Caitlyn ASU. They were reimagining existing champions in a new, fresher light. So I worked on the Galio visual update and the Evelynn visual update. I didn't really have much to do, I didn't have much to do at all, actually, with the updated base designs, but I did get to take those base designs and iterate on some of the skins for them. Debonair Galio was the very first skin that I worked on. And then from there, I worked on Tango Evelynn and Safecracker Evelynn, which were both super fun skins to get to experiment with and explore. It's always kind of fun taking the older skins and updating them because they feel a little more dated. Safecracker Evelynn was her newest skin. It didn't require that much by way of like exploration and change. But it's always cool taking like an older piece of content and seeing where you can push it. It's very easy for thematics to sort of like bump elbows and like rub up against one another. That's something that we're always trying to sort of avoid when we're iterating on new thematic universes, is how exactly we can take something and carve out a really unique, really thematically expressive niche for it that doesn't cross too much with some of our other thematics. I think a good example is like Project and Mecha. You know, there's certain thematics that just naturally share quite a lot of inspiration. So just making sure that we're avoiding things like that. I was actually talking about this with a friend the other day. He was like, what do you do when you just run out of ideas? So I don't think there'll ever be a time when like we run out of potential for new and exciting thematics for skins. And I chalk that up largely just to specifically the skins team. It's one of the most diverse teams I've ever worked on. Because even if someone were to say pitch a thematic that felt a little derivative or a little similar to a skin that exists already, there are so many people there to offer feedback, so many people there to offer ideas. And it really becomes pretty easy when you have that many people sort of brainstorming at something at once to find something that feels unique and new, but that'll still create a really exciting, really resonant experience for players. So a lot of times, the job of the concept artist is really to generate excitement from the team over a specific direction for a skin to take. And here on the skins team, we really work from a sort of narrative lens. So rather than just designing skins that are like, oh, it's Olaf, but he's in a shirt, it's really kind of examining those characters, but from a different sort of narrative point of view. So like the Blood Moon skin line is a great example. It's like you have your base Evelynn, who's, you know, kind of your classic like succubus archetype. And in the Blood Moon universe, we sort of reimagined her as this yokai, sort of like cultist, Blood Moon worshiper, almost like deity sort of figure. So you really get to kind of play around with narrative and thematic and sort of solve for how we're going to fit each of our champion archetypes neatly into a new and exciting universe for players. We have a bunch of skin lines that are super popular and for good reason. But even those, we like try to find new and exciting ways to sort of revitalize every couple of years and releases. Like when Star Guardian, Xayah, Rakan, Zoe, and Neeko came out, that one was a little contentious. There are people who enjoy the standard, like magical, myself included, the standard magical girl sort of genre influences, but pushing that into something that felt a little bit more dangerous and a little bit more aggressive, I think was an interesting direction for the universe for sure. And I think players were really, really excited by the potential to sort of explore almost like tangential areas in the universe and find different ways to kind of just sort of plumb the depths of the narratives that we've been creating for ourselves. So no, I think there'll always be a way to like innovate and create something that feels fresh and new. What I've painted here is basically going to be, it should serve fine as the body of the gun. The only parts that will need to move individually are the lenses, this inner barrel, and this rear stock piece. So everything that I've like slightly rendered here so far should function pretty perfectly with Caitlin's existing rig. Caitlin's rifle is hex tech in nature. It doesn't necessarily need to be super realistic, so I think as long as you can suspend your disbelief and believe that it functions, I think it's an effective design. It'd be fun if like, oh my God, her joke now shoots out like a flag, so she could have like a Joker like bang flag. It would work perfectly. So the contact points for the gun again are the grip, the bottom end of the barrel where she holds it like she is here in her left hand, which would line up to about here. So I should extend that down just a little bit further to make sure that there's enough space for Caitlin's hands themselves to make contact without clipping through the gun. That's what's most important when it comes to like keeping the points of contact the same, is making sure she can hold it, but that it won't clip into her body. But these elements here, like these are unnecessary to the silhouette. As long as it's like large and she's holding it in the proper areas, it should be fine. I'm gonna put, there's another lens here, if I'm remembering the placement correctly. I did like, so earlier I mentioned that you don't need to include the additive like animation effects on the gun all the time. I did opt to remove the lenses from the pool party gun, just because I think it didn't quite make sense for the fantasy. When you see like a water gun super soaker, you don't necessarily see them with glass lenses. So I actually replaced those with the large, thicker tube materials, which I think felt just a little bit more thematically appropriate. So something that I like to pay attention to when I'm working on concepts is the idea of just like conceptual through lines. I think Caitlin's gun in particular, it should feel pretty elegant, it should feel pretty composed. I wanna make sure there's a lot of really nice like organic lines flowing through the design. You can sort of see it in this swoop from the bottom of the barrel up through the grip of the gun. I wanna make sure that same line is sort of being continued through here into the stock. So I'm gonna extend just a little bit more of this gilded piece, and I'm gonna see how far I can push it. I'm gonna merge my layers now because I'm feeling pretty good about where most of this design is. Not quite all of it, but most of it. It would be cool to reference some fantasized real world elements, but for now I think what we have is working pretty well. And the silhouette is really the most important part of the design, especially in a game that says visually sort of structured as League is, because everything is really far away, really small. You wanna make sure that you're making really conscious decisions about how you're breaking your silhouette. So if I were to just make these little shapes cutting through the edge of the gun like this, it wouldn't be very impactful and you wouldn't really be able to see it from in-game. But if I really extend these cuts and make them really broad and sweeping, it becomes much more apparent. And you'd be surprised like how many of the design decisions you make when you're working on content like this happen sort of organically like that. You know, you're just like experimenting with something on Summoner's Rift and figuring out what works and what doesn't. Because it can be pretty easy to get attached, especially if you're like predominantly working in like front-facing sort of like glamour shots where you're not really considering the limitations of gameplay. It can be easy to get super attached to the decisions you make there and difficult to do away with them once you move to an in-game space. So working like this, while it's not necessarily ideal, I think it does have its advantages because I'm able to really quickly and clearly figure out what's working and what isn't when looking at it in the context of the game. So I'm gonna use this same sort of dark blue material and maybe I'll just make it a little bit thicker. Yeah, because that kind of like almost geometric bend that I had in this before, it was feeling pretty at odds with the rest of the shape language in the gun. But something that's like a little bit more visible, I think works well. I think I'm gonna move back over to a little bit more polish on Kate and then I'm gonna put the two together and see how we're feeling. So again, at this point, you're just kind of like consolidating detail and deciding what is and isn't working. I just tried to put some buttons on the blouse, but honestly, it just kind of added a lot of unnecessary noise. The eye doesn't really need them to realize exactly what's going on there. Over time, you just kind of learn effective ways of relaying visual information, because at the end of the day, that's really all that you're doing. When you look at the amazing work that the splash artists are doing, that's with like a much stronger purpose for being purely visually appealing and selling a fantasy, whereas concept art needs to be functional. It needs to relay visual information, and it needs to inform a viewer like exactly what it is they're looking at, while also hopefully still being visually appealing. But whereas before, I used to get really invested in like rendering the folds of fabric. I used to get really invested in, you know, making sure that I felt everything was being sort of like relayed visually in a super, super detailed sense now. Now I can just kind of be like, okay, this is a cylindrical shape. I'm gonna, you know, darken the edges of it and then round a point so that it's apparent to the viewer that this is cylindrical. And that's really like kind of all that you need to do. I think you can really make use of like, say that we wanted this to be like a really strong like specular satin material. You just kind of control the amount of local color to highlight to shadow that there is. And then you can just kind of inform that in like 3 simple blocks of color. It does not need to be like those photographs of satin that are like super, like really shiny in multiple different directions. You don't really need to index quite so heavily on it. So we're getting to the point where I'm gonna be able to just kind of like fuse these two. For the purposes of what we're trying to accomplish today, I think she's getting to a pretty cool spot. But I might do something else just to fill up this little bit of negative space here, because I do think it's making the gun feel a little bare without something there. So maybe just like another little sculptural. I want it to feel very ornamental, like she makes a lot of money running this circus. This belt is also really boring right now. I wonder what I could do to jazz that up. What kind of belts do ringleaders wear? Be like the nose. I try to like break it down into basically like basic shapes. So you'd have the nose, teeth, eyes, ears, and like a mane kind of. And then the lower would be the bottom of the jaw and 2 teeth. I can make that work, yeah. Okay, this is so much fun. Thank you guys so much for having me. I just basically fake the perspective after I've like warped it. She's pretty much there. I think that about does it for the time that we have for this today. Thank you all so much for tuning in. This has been such a fun project to work on. I love anything to do with Caitlin, and this prompt was just super goofy and really fun to execute on. Next month, we're gonna be doing another episode, taking a closer look at the environment art discipline, which I really recommend you check out. There's a lot of really fascinating stuff that goes into what environment artists do here at Riot. If anyone wants to check out more of my work, you can see it online, and you can also check me out on Twitter at Fairy Fountain. Thank you all so much for tuning in, and I'll see y'all later.